Well, with me today is Sarabeth Caplin. Sarabeth is an author. She is a freelancer. She is a blogger. Her writing has shown up in Sojourners and Huffington Post. Her memoir, Confessions of a Prodigal Daughter, became an Amazon bestseller. And her most recent book, whose title I just absolutely love, is Spinning Crap into Fertilizer. And it's a beautiful book about suffering. And I think throughout the pandemic, a lot of us can kind of resonate with a lot of what she writes. So Sarabeth, thank you so much for being willing to chat with me today.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
No, it's my pleasure. So one of the things that I love about your writing in the book, but also in just in your blogs, is you talk a lot about faith kind of in a time where life just doesn't make sense, in these places where life seems to turn upside down, or you're commenting on maybe some of the idiosyncrasies of life. So what is the role of faith for you in those places where life just seems to get messy?
Yeah, faith is it's definitely the grounding, the one thing that stays consistent when life is chaotic and unpredictable, which technically it's like that all the time. It just feels that way more so over the last 2 years for most people. But yeah, faith is just that reminder of what is true. Tragedy and suffering has a way of upending everything that we think is certain, and everything we thought we could trust. And faith is just the one thing that says, this is who God is, and this is true, this is unchanging. And, for someone who is very type A and likes planning and likes routine and likes everything to go according to a certain structure, that is something that definitely helps keep me grounded and sane, and just helps me, remember what's important and what I really can trust. Sure.
Wonderful. So the tagline to your book is, and again, I love it, is Spinning Crap into Fertilizer, but the subtitle is How American Christianity Has Forgotten the Necessity of Suffering. And it's the word necessity which kind of spoke to me and kind of leapt out. What exactly do you mean by Christianity and then the necessity of suffering?
Yeah, so at the time that I wrote this, it came out about 2 years ago this month in 2019, in a very different world. So at the time, I was thinking of the prosperity gospel, which doesn't just refer to money. That is the first thing that pops up in people's heads when they think of the prosperity gospel. But in a lot of churches, that prosperity gospel can refer to the promise of a good marriage, or a new house, or just other like material possessions, or just good things happening in general if you are faithful, if you follow this formula. That kind of lifestyle is just so unfamiliar to the early Christians, to the saints and martyrs that we revere in the Catholic Church calendar. For many people, for the early Christians, including Jesus Christ himself, but also Paul and most of his disciples, to take on a life of faith, a life of a disciple, you were essentially saying yes to a life of suffering, to, at the time, being on the margins, to being persecuted, to just, I guess, being looked at as weird, which is probably the most common form of persecution, air quotes, in our American society today. And so I came up with that title thinking that we have forgotten that God speaks the loudest, that God's power and the reality of the gospel is most visible when we are suffering, which can mean a lot of different things in this modern era where a lot of us are, I'd say, upper to middle class people of social standing. That could mean suffering, could mean, for me, when I wrote this, I was coming out of a period of financial suffering. My husband lost his job unexpectedly, and he was unemployed for 9 months, during which we were basically living off my income, our savings, and the gratitude of our community. And just not knowing, like, is he ever going to get another job? Are we going to have to sell our house? We just bought that house, our first house, just a few months prior to him losing his job. We hadn't even celebrated 1 year of living there. So just not knowing, are we going to have to sell it or foreclose? Are we going to have to move in with my parents? Or, what's our life going to look like? And that was a critical period of suffering, if you will.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
That I had never known before. I grew up pretty comfortable. I had just never not known what it's like to have to rely on people for basic things like meals and their generosity. People would like give us Target gift cards and things. And I'm getting sidetracked, but through that period, I was just reminded that God sustains, the gospel sustains. And, even if my circumstances are uncertain, this does not mean that God is not good. This does not mean that God is not providing. And, I learned that his provision may not necessarily look like a new job, which he did eventually get, thankfully. We're still in the same house. We didn't have to move. That provision could look like a new job, but more often than not, it looks like the church stepping up and being the church. It looks like having your faith tested and growing in a period of famine. I guess if I'd written this book today, I certainly would have included more about the pandemic, because that was just the most unexpected thing to happen in terms of marketing for this book. We are just seeing today so many Christians, so many churches forgetting the necessity of picking up your cross, putting your own needs last, serving your neighbor. And for many people, that looks like having Zoom church instead of live church. That means wearing a mask, even though it's uncomfortable and it's hot outside. It means getting a vaccine. It means laying aside our liberties for the sake of protecting our neighbor. That is essentially what picking up your cross means in this context today, in a modern form of suffering and putting comfort last. And, I'm just so appalled and embarrassed at how many churches are just and Christians are just so reluctant to do that. They're falling on the hill of my rights, my freedoms, when the gospel says the exact opposite. Absolutely. And when you sign up to be a disciple of Jesus Christ, you are essentially saying that I do not come first.
Yeah.
And so, that just completely blew me away, and just made this book so much more relevant than I ever expected it to be. So
I think that there's a powerful, so often I think we misunderstand what we're trying to say when we talk about, the necessity of suffering, because it kind of makes it sound like self-flagellation. Well, you must hurt yourself, right? And that's not the case.
No.
But these
suffering has a wide nuance.
But it kind of unmasks the lie that faith is just the prosperity gospel. Faith will just make everything okay. I know that as a priest, I often feel the temptation to believe that bigger churches are better churches, right? Bigger churches are blessed churches, and churches that are going through a hard thing, well, that's just, that testifies that you're not doing the ministry that you need to be doing. And so I like the language of necessity of suffering, because it roots us back into this call to take up our cross, this call to be a community, to share, to care, to lovingly walk beside others. So you also say, and it's right at the beginning, that the cross is central to Christian faith, and we would all agree to that. But you also say that many Christians have forgotten this. Can you just elaborate that a little bit?
They've forgotten just that signing up to be a disciple is basically saying yes to a life of suffering, of putting yourself last, but also of just being considered weird, being considered closed-minded, which is kind of like the worst thing you can be in this culture, where every choice that I make must be affirmed, or else you are essentially persecuting me. It's a reminder that, those aren't the worst things to be if what you are standing up for is the truth. And we're certainly to do this lovingly. Truth cannot effectively change anything if it is not communicated with grace. And but at the same time, no matter how lovingly you say, certain unpopular things, whether it's like Jesus is the only way to heaven, or God doesn't just want you to be happy,
Sure.
so living with your boyfriend or girlfriend before marriage, or just having sex with whomever, like it's not okay because it's what you want, like God,
Sure. Yeah.
doesn't exist just to feed your every desire. There's like a certain standard that you're signing up for when you say yes
Sure. Yeah.
to Christ. And so yeah, just that kind of suffering too is like a whole other realm. It's not bad things happening to you, it's just you choosing this very rigid, narrow way of
Yeah.
life, and just having the rest of society looking at you like, but you have the freedom to live otherwise. Like, why would you do that?
Yeah. Yeah. I like that idea of Christ calls you to be weird.
Yeah, one of my favorite recent books that I've read recently is by Michael Frost, I think, Keep Christianity Weird. And I think that is just such a great slogan. And I want it on every t-shirt and coffee
Sure.
mug and magnet that I can find, because it's just amazing.
Absolutely. And but it's such a radical call, so my parish hears a lot of Dietrich Bonhoeffer, because I love Dietrich Bonhoeffer, and I love the movement that he had as this rich upper class German aristocratic guy who began his ministry really kind of toting the party line in some sense, and then through his time in Abyssinian Baptist Church in Harlem, really began to see that Christ stands with the less fortunate.
Right.
Christ stands with those who cry. Christ stands with the suffering. And as a Christian person, he couldn't be about power and domination. He had to be about journeying with those who were least. And it completely changed his understanding of who Christ was and who he was and what the call of Christianity was all about.
Certainly, yeah.
Yeah. So you talk about finding the redemptive purpose in suffering. And I think you mean something beyond just, well, there's a silver lining in every cloud. It's not just something polite and quaint. You're saying something really, really quite deep. What do you mean by the redemptive purpose in suffering?
That's a great question. And if I knew the absolute answer to that, I would have written a much longer book. Yeah, I certainly don't have the answer to that. And I don't think that there is one single answer to that. I think suffering can certainly be used for our sanctification. And I think ultimately that is definitely possible, but it's not something that we always see.
Okay. Yeah.
I think of, another reason I wrote this book, I had my father in mind, who about a week from tomorrow will have been deceased from cancer for about 7 years now.
Wow.
And I kind of sat on the sidelines for several months when I moved back to my parents' house to help take care of him, like watching him slowly slip away, and then suddenly all at once. And, I just found myself wondering, like, what is the purpose in this? Like, where is the redemption? Because all I see right now is a man just in pain. Like, how is there any benefit in this? And, my father was not a religious man. He didn't really like to talk about faith. So I have no idea what was going through his head as far as spirituality. I'm sure if anything, he might have been mad at God for letting this happen to him. And I certainly don't blame him for that at all. I was mad too.
Yeah, absolutely.
But it's funny because that summer I was watching that happen, and I was also reading a book. I forget the title, but it was by Kara Tippett, I think.
Okay.
A woman who has also since died from cancer. And, that process was like, for her, she really saw God's transformative grace in that period of her life, in the last few months of her life. And she wrote this book about, what God was teaching her, and how her suffering had been redeemed, and how she chose to stay and, take whatever essentially was in her cup of suffering that she was offered, and not choose the path of euthanasia, which was something else my dad had considered, but ultimately chose not to do. And, really, I have more questions than answers about that. I think that suffering can certainly be a witness, but I'm kind of more, I don't want to use the word expert, but I can't think of another word right now. I'm more knowledgeable, I guess you would say, in like emotional forms of suffering, like job loss
Okay. Yeah.
or depression, than I am like physical suffering. I don't have a ton of experience in that area.
Sure.
So I am incredibly hesitant to say, like, oh yeah, God can do anything in this. I mean,
Yeah.
I just sometimes he doesn't. Sometimes he doesn't heal.
Yeah.
So
and that's a hard and sometimes we don't articulate just how hard that is, right?
mhm.
It's, we talk about, oh, just have hope and just believe and have faith. And
Yeah.
I think we have a hard time sitting in that place of wrestling and that place of
Mhm.
crying and that place of suffering when we're longing for something, whether it's a healing or it's a new job or whatever, and it's just not coming.
Mhm. I think the best comfort in that situation is just knowing that our Savior has also suffered and is walking with us in that suffering.
Yeah.
And there is no form of pain, physical or emotional, that he has never known before. And for some people, that's comforting. For others, it's kind of a cop out. And
Sure.
they'll wonder, like, well, if that's all powerful, why can't he just get rid of it? Why can't he just make it go away? Um, and my very simple answer to that is just because we live in a fallen world that
Yeah.
follows the rules of nature, where so-called good people end up with cancer
Yeah.
and die 2 months before their daughters get married.
Sure. Yeah.
And just unfair things happen, and we just through
Yeah.
that, when we live in this fallen world, we live by these laws of nature that don't operate the way that we want. It sustains me to know that God is walking with me through that. I know that's
Absolutely.
not a comfort to other people. And I understand, because I've been there. I've been through a
Yeah.
period of doubt and wrestling where I thought, like, that's not good enough.
Sure.
But just for right now, I mean, that's the best I can offer. That's the biggest truth that I know.
Yeah.
And I guess it's up to other people to just sit with that and figure out for themselves what that means in their life.
Yeah. Well, and I think one of the, and for me at least, one of the redemptive, I guess, areas in suffering or places where I can find redemption in the midst of it is the ability to articulate what I'm going through,
Mhm.
knowing that God is big enough to take it.
Right.
And we are allowed to bring, like, we don't have to shy away from any of our feelings or our wrestlings or our dark emotions or whatever it is. We're allowed to bring all that stuff.
Right.
And we are actually given language to do this. One of the things that has kind of popped up in much of my conversations, probably because I'm a lover of the Psalms, is the idea of the Psalms.
Mhm.
And you begin the book like right after which I love, right after the table of contents by quoting Psalm 13. How long, O Lord, will you forget me forever? How long will you hide your face from me? Why did you choose this as really kind of the first entrance into the book?
Because it's just one of the most relatable parts of Scripture.
Sure.
I think we've all felt that.
Yeah.
Whether toward God or to another human that we love and trust, it's just such a universal statement of lament, just naked, honest lament.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's as beautiful as it is devastating, because we've all been there.
Sure. Yeah.
Or we will.
Well, yeah, and again, it's that I remember, my second year of my doctoral program. My wife had just finished a journey through cancer, and right on my wife's last treatment, my mom got diagnosed, right? Like, so this was like a huge kind of thing. And I remember sitting in one of my classes called Nurturing Spirituality, which was, we ended up talking about just, providing hope and, resting on the promises of God. And I just kind of went off, and just kind of said, perhaps actually when someone's going through these hard times, perhaps what we should do is give them a lament.
Yeah.
And say, here you go. Here's Psalm 13 or Psalm 88 or whatever it is. Scream away.
Mm-hmm.
And just have that articulation.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And we don't always do this, and again, I own this as a priest, but we don't always do this in the church. right? You're Anglican as well. Our lectionary sometimes skips these songs, right? Like we shy away from these hard realities, which I think helps people believe that lie that, well, if I just believe in Jesus, everything will be okay. And it doesn't always occur that way.
Yeah, and that's something I love about Judaism and Jewish culture. That is one thing I think Christians can learn from, that Jews are people of lament. Jews do it very well.
Yeah.
Literally a book called Lamentations
in
scripture. And, just Christians have become so afraid of this emotion, which is not right or wrong in and of itself. Like, emotions are not moral or immoral. They just are.
Sure, absolutely.
We don't think that the God that essentially made us to feel this way can't handle all of that.
Yeah. For those who might not know, your book, Confessions of a Prodigal Daughter, documents your conversion from Reformed Judaism to Christianity. And so you come with that heritage. And I know in your blogs, you've said you haven't given that up. Like, you kind of hold both realities in some sense.
Yeah, well, you don't exactly give up heritage.
Sure, exactly.
So you can give up your citizenship, which is, essentially what I've done. But yeah, the heritage is like, it's part of you.
Yeah. So at the back of the book, you have this wonderful place of listing some resources of places to go or music to listen to if you're in this place of suffering and struggle. And you list "We're Not Gonna Take It" by Twisted Sister.
Yes, and I've since heard that song in a video clip on, it was like TikTok or something, of people walking through a Target without masks and basically like blasting the song "We're Not Gonna Take It," like, we're not gonna take mandates or whatever. And I'm just like cringing, like, oh, way to ruin that for me, because no, I'm just gonna think of that video when I hear the song. But I think it's still a good song. It's angry.
So
it's honest.
So why did you put that in there? Like, so at the time of writing, what did that song speak to for you?
Because it's just a call to action, really. Like, we're not gonna take it, and the "it" is purposely unspecified, which I love.
Okay.
So used for like, well, actually, I don't. In the song, it's not specifically recognized, but I don't know the intent behind it, whoever wrote it. But the "it" could be anything. I mean, there may be nothing you can do about something like cancer or the coronavirus, so that you might have to take whether you like it or not. But it's a call to action for me. Like, we're not going to take it. Like, we're not going to just sit back and, let the disease or the virus or whatever it is that's affecting us do the talking for us.
Okay. Yeah.
This is not all that I am. This is not like, this does not have to define me. And, it's a secular song, and there's other secular songs and books that I've recommended, just, because truth is truth, whether no matter what the source is. Just lament is lament, and I just thought that song was a appropriate thing to include.
Well, and it's a good prayer, right? If you do want to direct it to God, to say, hey, I don't want to take it. Like, I'm not going to take this. Like, it's okay to actually voice those feelings again, right? And there is that healing part. There is that, there's the psalm that says, "When I kept silent, my bones wasted away." And so, like, when we keep silent and keep everything in, we feel the weight of everything, and there's no release, there's no valve for it to get out. And so when we scream Psalm 13, or when we scream, "We're not going to take it," or whatever I'm pretty sure we all have our angry songs that we blast when we need to. But when we do that, it's that release valve. And again, knowing that God is big enough that God can take it.
Absolutely.
So one of the other things that you mentioned is the role of the Eucharist. Where does the Eucharist, where does the Eucharist play in a place of suffering?
All the places. The Eucharist for me, and it's like one of the most recent revolutionary aspects of my faith since joining the Anglican Church. Like I've become an evangelist for the Eucharist, basically. I just love that it is a tangible experience of Christ's suffering, like his body that I break for you, do this in remembrance of me. So, essentially, every time you take a part of the Eucharist, you are participating in that suffering, you're participating in that death. And that's a reminder not just of the role that we play as sinners that, help make that happen, but, we're also carrying out a decree from Christ himself.
Mm-hmm.
And so, regardless of whether you believe that it's physically the body of Christ or just a representative, like symbolic, it's still participating in that suffering. It's a friend of mine, she put it this way, that you are essentially like participating in a Jewish yahrzeit or a memorial of someone's death every time you partake in the Eucharist. And that just kind of blew my mind. Not just like of some of Jewishness in that tradition, but just that is what it is. It is like a memorial of sorts. It's remembering Christ. And it just, especially now during this period where the coronavirus is still raging in many parts of the country, to have the privilege to be able to physically partake in the Eucharist again, it's just so life-giving.
Absolutely.
Sorely, if there's anything I missed the most in the period of quarantine, it was not being able to do that. Yeah,
and that is what a lot of people miss. We're still kind of in this place where we're not able to gather. Alberta is the worst in the country. So we're, and that's what people viscerally feel, right? Not being able to sit at the altar or kneel at the altar rail and feel something placed in your hands. Because it is this beautiful place where Christ says to us, if you want to find me, you can find me here. And wherever we are, even if we're in a place of doubt and questioning and suffering, being able to feel the bread testifies, well, even if I don't feel it, I feel the bread, right? Like I can feel it come, I can feel the wine flow in me. And so I can, even if I don't recognize the redemption, I can still receive that message that life does kind of burst forth, even in a place of darkness. So we're pretty close to the end here. I want to ask we ask the same question for every single time to end. If you knew that somebody was watching this and in that place of suffering and in that place of discouragement, that frustration, maybe that place of doubt, what would you want to say to them?
That sucks. First and foremost, like, man, that sucks. And I'm sorry that you are going through that. Like, you don't have to put a positive spin on it for people. You don't have to rush to figure out a meaning behind it. Like, it can just suck. And that is okay. And I wish I had the authority to offer a promise that it's not going to be forever, but it could be. I don't know. But God is still with you and walking with you, and you can tell him that it sucks because he already knows. And I hope that you have the freedom to lament that situation with God, and that you find that life-giving and sustaining. Because he can take it.
That's beautiful. Thank you so much. Because what is, it's we often forget how needed it is, even just to hear someone say, wow, that sucks.
I would also say, because I come from a Jewish family, can I bring you food? Can I make you a casserole?
Sure.
Can I send you a DoorDash gift card? Like, just give me something to do that is tangible and useful that you need that would help you. You know, Absolutely. It could be food, it could be running your errands, watching your kids while you go to a doctor's appointment, just whatever.
Yeah. I remember the first time when my church was gathering around us through our hard time with my wife's illness, the first time I allowed myself to be vulnerable enough to turn to someone who said, you know, what can we do for you? Because my inclination is just to be, well, I'll be stalwart and I'll say, oh, everything's fine. To actually turn to them and say, can you mow my lawn? Because I can't mow my lawn. I'm not getting to it. And, you know, we began by you talking about the role of the community, which doesn't make things necessarily easier or better or make the stuff go away, but journeys with us to say to us, that sucks, or to give us meals or mow our lawn, and to journey with us as we go through this time. Yeah, wonderful.
Yeah.
Sarabeth, thank you so much for talking with me today. I know that my congregation is going to be blessed by our conversation. For people who want to know more about Sarabeth, you can go to sbethcaplin.com and you'll find her books, you'll find her blogs, you'll find everything that she has there, and the ability to contact Sarabeth if you wish.
Sarabeth with a C, not a K.
C, Caplin with a C, and not a K, absolutely.
Like Chaplain, but without the H.
Yeah, yes, yes. Thank you again so much for agreeing to talk with me today.
Yeah, of course.
Wonderful.
That's great.
Yeah, perfect. All right, God bless.
You too.